Thank you for joining us today. Today, August 2nd, Attorney General, is the anniversary of your government in power. I want you to take me back to your mood after March 2nd vote to August 5th. That's 5 months of. I want you to take me back to that time and tell me what August the 2nd, 2020 represents to you now. You've had 4 years to look back at that time.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this discussion. August the 2nd held for most Guyanese a momentous time because we casted our ballots on the 2nd of March. And when we did so, not in our wildest imagination did any rational-minded Guyanese think, other than, of course, maybe those at GCOM who were subsequently implicated, and those in the opposition who were then in the government, who were commonly described at that time, and even now, as the rigging cabal. Accepting the rigging cabal, I don't think any rational Guyanese would have ever imagined that we would have had to travel that road which we actually traveled before those results of the elections were eventually declared. Declaring President Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali as the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and the People's Progressive Party Civic as the victor at the polls. It must be one of the most historic struggle in contemporary history of a struggle to get the ballots counted at any given elections, perhaps over the last 3 decades. I can't recall of any elections that were embroiled in such controversy manufactured by one side in their relentless pursuit of an agenda to falsify the results of those elections. I do not believe also that there is any elections whose results took 5 months to tabulate and finally be declared in accordance with the relevant laws and the provisions of the Constitution. You had the United Kingdom going to elections just last month, and approximately 29 million ballots were counted in 48 hours.
Half the population.
Right? 48 hours. Yeah. Here you have just over 500,000.
Yeah.
And it took 5 months. But we know that it didn't take 5 months to reckon. The 5 months elapsed because of officials of the Elections Commission, the body tasked with the constitutional responsibility of administering those elections fairly and transparently, attempting in conspiracy with others in the political spectrum to unlawfully alter the results of those elections in order to give to the then government an electoral victory which was not consistent with the ballots cast in the box, the boxes across the country.
Right.
And we can go through the various stratagems and strategies that were pursued and the recourses to the courts and all the other political and disgraceful machinations that were resorted to carry out and execute this objective of simply stealing the next government. Because that was what the objective was. But when one would have done an analysis, the antecedents which laid the foundation for the unfolding of this plot took place long before. One can begin with the appointment, illegal appointment, unconstitutional appointment of a chairman to the Guyana Elections Commission by President Granger as perhaps the most visible and ostensible signal of what was to unfold. That chairman clearly was unilaterally appointed to deliver perverse election results. As you know, our Constitution requires the leader of the opposition to submit 6 names to the president for appointment. Never before in the history of our country was there any ambiguity or interpretative problems with that constitutional provision. It was used without rancor and or controversy on at least 5 different occasions, where President Hoyt appointed Rudy Collins from a list submitted to him by Dr. Cherry Jagan. And then Mr. Hoyt submitted names to Dr. Jagan for the appointment of another chairman for the local government elections of 1994. And then there was another chairman appointed. I believe President Janet Jagan would have received 6 names from Mr. Desmond Hoyt, out of which Dudnat Singh came. And then Mr. Hoyt again would have submitted 6 names to President Jagdeo, out of which Joe Singh came. And then Mr. Corbyn, I think, would have submitted 6 names, out of which Steve Suraj Bali came. All of this happening with no one questioning the purpose of the provision in the Constitution, no one complaining about the language being unequivocal or equivocal, no one complaining that there is any interpretative difficulty. Suddenly Mr. Granger is there, and the first opportunity he gets to appoint a chairman of the Elections Commission, the first set of names that leader of the opposition, Mr. Jagdeo, submitted was rejected. First time. And you heard the most ridiculous interpretation being put on the provision that only judges must be submitted. Only judges' names must be submitted. All sorts of indecipherable and ludicrous interpretation being placed upon the clear language of the Constitution. Leader of the opposition, Mr. Jagdeo, ended up submitting 80 names. 3 sets of 6 names, all of qualified Guyanese, judges, heads of the army, accountants, all sorts of people who would have been distinguished in their different pursuits in national life, etc. And they were all rejected as being unfit and improper by President Granger. And then, lo and behold, the Constitution was then again wildly misinterpreted by Mr. Granger to say that if all the names that that leader of the opposition, Mr. Jagdev, submits to him and they are unsuitable to him, he can then unilaterally appoint one of his own choosing. Now the Constitution says if no name is submitted, then the president can act unilaterally. Here you have 80 names being submitted. So one night we heard, without any public ceremony, this gentleman by the name of James Patterson being sworn in as the chairman of GCOM. And then he began a process that we were forced to go to the court to stop. He began a fresh registration process across the country. Now, upon afterthought, well, not afterthought, at the time we realized quickly what was happening. What they were planning to do with this registration exercise was to selectively register persons and deliberately exclude from the registration exercise tens of thousands of persons who were qualified to be put on the list and registered. So you would have had a list that would not have been an accurate list, a list with a heavy bias in terms of those whom they perceive to be supporters of the incumbent party, the government of the day. That was the purpose of the exercise. We had to rush to the court and get the Chief Justice to rule that you simply can't wake up one morning and scrap the database because you are disenfranchising all those people who are already on the register.
Right.
Imagine I am going to bed one day as a registered elector, and through no fault of mine, I wake up the next day and I'm no longer a registered elector in the country. My constitutional right is gone through no fault of mine. I didn't agree for my name to be registered. I am not disqualified from being on the list. I am not dead. I am not of unsound mind. I have not committed an electoral offense. On what basis are you taking me off the list? Because those are the grounds upon which you can remove persons' names on the list. So we went to court and we got that clarified. So that put a spoke in the wheel. They now had to go back to the drawing board. By that time, the no confidence motion came. And that was passed. And that essentially toppled their government, at least under the Constitution.
Yes.
They, of course, squatted in government for nearly a year after, in clear defiance and violation of the prescription outlined by the Constitution when a no confidence vote is successful. The Constitution, without gloss, according to the Caribbean Court of Justice, says very clearly that the President and the Cabinet must resign and elections must be called within 3 months, unless Parliament, by a 2/3 majority, extend that time beyond 3 months. Of course, Parliament never did that. But they refused to comply, saying that GCOM was not ready to hold elections. But even before that, they challenged the no confidence motion. The night that it was passed, Moses Nagamotu, Prime Minister, in the Parliament, held a press conference and conceded that the government has fallen in accordance with the Constitution. That was, I believe, the 22nd of December, 2018.
2018, yes.
I remember distinctly on the 27th of December, Keith Lowenfield, as Chief Elections Officer, made a public statement that GCOM is ready to go to the elections. Now, that was before instructions would have been given to him. They went back to the Parliament by themselves and attempted to get the Speaker to recall the no confidence motion. That failed. They still had 2 sittings, I believe, of the Parliament by themselves and passed legislation. Controversial legislation too. I believe they passed a petroleum legislation by themselves. They lost government, you know. The Parliament is automatically dissolved once the no confidence motion succeeds. It's dissolved. The country is now in election mode. They went back into the Parliament, sat and passed their own laws. When that didn't stop the public pressure that was mounting on the ground and in the diplomatic community. They then challenged the no confidence motion. Their attorney at law hired 2 lawyers and paid them with government funds to bring some party supporter from New Amsterdam to file legal proceedings to set aside the no confidence motion. So he, the Attorney General, hired 2 lawyers to represent a citizen to sue the Attorney General to say that the Constitution was not complied with, that the no confidence vote was invalid because 33 is not a majority of 65. Nigel Hughes, the leader of the AFC, came up with that hilarious formula. And I believe the government was so hungry for power and so desperate. They say a drowning man will clutch at a straw. So they clutched at that. And they went to court with that. We went all the way to the Caribbean Court of Justice. Because we won in the High Court. The Court of Appeal ruled against us. And the population should know these things.
Yeah.
I walked with a matchbox with 65 matchsticks. I asked the court's permission to open the matchbox on the desk of the court, and asked the court's permission to do a demonstration. To their credit, the court allowed me. I put 33 matchsticks in one bundle, and I put 32 matchsticks in another bundle. And I asked the court, which bundle has more matchsticks? Is the bundle with 33 not a majority of the 2 bundles? Because majority, and I had an English dictionary, majority means greater in number.
Yeah.
I give another example. I said Mary has 5 cherries in the classroom. The teacher tells Mary, put 3 cherries in one parcel and 2 cherries in the other parcel. Which parcel has the majority of cherries? Right? The Court of Appeal ruled against us. We went to the Caribbean Court of Justice. On that issue, when the Attorney General got up to speak, the CCJ said that they don't wish to hear any submission on that particular point. Because that court doesn't need to be convinced that 33 is a majority of 65. Right? So you had that. Still yet, they refused to resign and hold elections. You had a whole host of protests, public pressures, and everything else that you know transpired. Then, finally, at the end of 2019, December, the last couple days in December month, the president announced that elections will be on March the 2nd. So that was the build-up, right?
That was setting the stage
Right.
for what is to come
But-
after March 2nd.
Right. But remember, they were being thwarted all along. Imagine if we were not vigilant and we were not resilient and we were not tactful and we were not ready to challenge, what would have happened? So even then, when the election date was announced, the machinations did not stop. Every week was a different thing. Every week. They wanted to remove people's names off the list. They filed, I remember one time they filed an objection to several hundred names in an Amerindian community on the ground that these people were dead. We had to bring all those people out from the end of 60 miles up the Mahiconi River to a GCOM office to verify the existence of those people.
Wow.
And it continued like that. Battle after battle, every day is a different thing. Even the day before, 2 days before the elections, they named the polling places in certain PPP strongholds. And when we look at the polling places, they were inadequate. They were located at long, far distances from where the people lived. Worse yet, they broke up the list in such a way that PPP supporters were voting in APNU strongholds and vice versa. So persons in one community for years would vote in their own community. This time around, they moved those lists and put them to vote in a different community. So the people got to come out on the road, come out and go and vote in another environment. That is historically,
Was that deliberate?
obviously deliberate. Never happened before. In an environment that historically had been openly hostile. It happens in election time in Guyana. That is the reality. And that was done with that deliberate design
To intimidate.
to discourage
To
voters,
thwart them from going.
discourage voters from turning out.
Right.
And if you have 2,000 people, voters voting at one polling station, do you know how long it will take for the voters to be in that line? So you had huge villages with one voting center. So like one school, many polling stations, but one school. So the entire village
Has to come round.
got to come.
Yeah.
And that has never been the position. When we inquired, they said that they don't want to use private residences, that the policy is to use only public institutions. So where there is no public buildings in a village, according to them, they are not going to rent private premises. Although historically we have rent private premises for decades. But we were able to point out several private premises being rented in Georgetown, where there is, perhaps more than any part of the country, an abundance of public buildings.
Yeah. Wow.
But yet, private residences were rented. But that was not replicated on the East Coast, for example. 2 nights before the elections, people didn't know where they were going to vote. We had to take a team from GCOM and walk them into the community to show Many miles people have to walk to come out to vote at the stations. And we got that rectified just 48 hours before March the 2nd. On January 31st, we didn't start that out yet. You're talking about thousands of voters. I say that to you to tell you that up to the last day, there were attempts at manipulation, attempts to ensure that voters would have been prevented or at least discouraged from casting their ballots. And it is not a coincidence that these occurrences took place only in PPP, traditional PPP strongholds. It did not manifest itself in other areas. Are you telling me that that's coincidence? I've lived in this country too long, been in this political environment too long. So we had to fight that battle to get that corrected. And then on election day itself, you had various attempts. Amna Ali and Basil Williams went to Monrepo Primary School. And I was there because that's my area. And when I walked into the compound, they were already there. And looked at me straight in my face and told me that they heard that I am sharing out ID cards. All of this was intended to rile up people. Now, I have a lawsuit against one of them and I'm going to win it on that same allegation because they repeated it several times. Now, why would I need to share out ID cards on election day? You just, rationalize that. In the area where I was born, let me assume that I for some reason, have ID cards. I don't know where I'll get it from. ID cards can only be gotten from GCOM.
Yeah.
So unless Lowenfield gives me the ID card, I don't know where I'll get it from. Right? And if I am working, would I share it out election day when all the international observers are there, when the police there in the place, when all the agents are around? The day when the international spotlight is on the Guyanese community more than any other day is the day that I will see fit to share out ID cards. And why would I even share out ID card? ID card is not an indispensable requirement to vote. If a person doesn't have an ID card, he can still vote. There are other mechanisms that one can identify oneself. I give you that example to tell you that on election day itself, the plan afoot to derail the democratic process was still alive and still at work. They were not stopping. And then we went to the polls. On the night in question, Mr. Granger made a public statement saying that the polls were peaceful and transparent and the elections were fair and free. They were boasting that they won the elections. None of the international observers made any statement that would be of cause for concern. By and large, every observer, both local and internationally accredited observer, reported that voting went smoothly. There were no major incidents, and the opposition, the government of the day, first reported that. And you know how we tabulate results. You count the ballots at the place of poll, and each station has a presiding officer and an assistant presiding officer and a ballot clerk. All are officials of GCOM, you know.
Right.
There are police presence, international observers, and so on. Then you have representatives of the political parties. Each political party has a representative. As far as I know, at least the two major political parties, APNU, AFC, and PPP, fielded polling agents in every single polling station. So you have presiding officer, assistant presiding officer, ballot clerk. You may have some other GCOM official, like 4 persons already, and the polling agents. They sit among themselves and they tabulate. Each one signs off the statements of
So
poll.
it's completely unanimous.
Yes, each one.
Which one?
And they go through the ballots by themselves and they reconcile whatever differences they have. And when you go in to vote, they call out your name. Every person has a list and they tick your name off. Then your ballot, your ID card and so on comes up. And each person has an opportunity to look at your ID card to verify that you are the person. This is a pictorial representation of you, you know. And then you're given the ballot, and your name is ticked off. You can't come back in that station, or no one can come in your stead. Right? No one can come back there because your vote is gone. All of that, those are the mechanisms in place. And then, of course, your ink, your finger is stained. So when that tabulation process is completed, and that is normally completed before midnight,
Right.
right across the country. And then the results go, each party would get the statements of poll, because the polling agent takes away a copy of the statements of poll, signed by the presiding officer, signed by the polling agent from the other parties, etc. And a copy of that is put on the door of the ballot station. And that is the first declaration of the results. So by time midnight, an efficient party machinery would know what the results of the election are. They knew. We knew.
The same night.
The same night. And hell broke loose when they realized that they lost. And then came the most majestic unfolding of attempts at fraud ever witnessed in the Western Hemisphere in modern history.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Statement of polls signed off, one of the strongest system, carefully monitored, comes to GCOM head office in the Ashman's building in Georgetown. How did they go about altering those numbers?
Well, there is another process. After the statements of poll come in, and one set gone to the GCOM, one set is with the returning officer, one set gone to the chief elections officer. And I believe he replicates it and gives it to the commission. But one is kept with the returning officer. There is another safety mechanism that is called the tabulation process. And this tabulation process allows for the returning officer to go through the statements of poll, now in the possession of all the parties. They are all now together. And there's a final tabulation that is going to be done between the statement of poll that the returning officer has and the statement of poll that each polling agent has. And that process is entitled to be observed by observers. And you go through statement of poll by statement of poll, and all supposed to coincide because they come from the same source. So ballot box number 1 of area number A, East Bank, Demerara. That's a one ballot box we will consider. It has one statement of poll. Everybody there, you're not counting ballots now.
Right.
You're tabulating and reconciling with the statements of poll now.
Yeah.
Because this is a summary
Right.
of everything. And once that is ticked off, then the returning officer who conducts that process makes a declaration for that particular electoral district. Now, we did 9 electoral districts. There are 10 in Guyana.
Right.
9 were done without any controversy whatsoever. 9. The last one that was left is region number 4, which, not without a coincidence, is where the APNU AFC has a stronghold. Now, recognizing the 9 have been completed without any dispute and any contestation, it was realized that this is the last one here. This is the last chance you have. Right? And the returning officer, in this case, is the gentleman by the name of Claremont Mingo.
Yeah.
And I can go through in details what went on, as I was in the room. He started, and everything went smoothly. He started and he completed nearly about, he completed a few hundreds without any problem. He was using the statements of poll. All the observers were there, the representatives of the different parties, and everything went smoothly. And during that process, I don't know what transpired, but he changed the mechanism and started to read off from a spreadsheet
Right.
at great speed. And it was quickly realized by all the political parties, excepting the APNU AFC representative, that's the only person who didn't find a fault. And the fault was that the numbers that were being called from this sheet was not corresponding on the numbers on the statements of poll.
There's a discrepancy.
And the discrepancies were consistent in nature. All the discrepancies, all the numbers that were found to be in error or inconsistent with the statement of poll, they increased the votes for APNU AFC. And there's a corresponding decrease
Right.
in the PPP-C votes. Remember, there is a finite number of votes in the box. So if you take up one side,
You got to take down.
you got to take down the other side. And that was the consistency of the error. It was not the other way. And not one went the other way. It's not as if one box on his spreadsheet that he had, the PPP was gaining a 1 vote or a 2 vote. None. They were all consistently going one side and consistently reducing on this side. And constant objections were being made. Because everybody wanted to know where this spreadsheet came from. What are you reading from? You're not reading from the record. You're not reading from the statements of poll. And the law clearly says that you must read from the statements of poll. We had to rush to the High Court and get an order. But he completed the process in record time and run upstairs of GCOM and made a declaration. While everybody is in turmoil, everybody are in turmoil. He ran upstairs, and he made a declaration. He claims that he made a declaration. And Valda Lawrence signed off on that declaration. What her signature is doing there, I don't even know. But those are the public record. And we had to rush to the High Court to get an order to quash the declaration and to restrain GCOM from acting upon that declaration and get another order directing the returning officer to return to the process and follow the procedure laid down by the law and use only the statements of polls as the basis for the tabulation. And that's what the law says. I remember the Chief Justice going through this thing with the whole court, including Mingo, and made it very clear that the statements of poll must be the basis upon which you do the tabulation. No other document. Mr. Mingo went back and continued the same process. Objection again, we objected. They moved the process to Kingston from Ashman's building, where they barricaded the road now. See, GCOM, a lot of people had access. The international community was there. And this thing is live on Facebook and so, live on the internet and everything. The whole world witnessing this thing. And then they took the process to Kingston, GCOM headquarters, where they put roadblocks from Lamahan Main Street and Parade Street that side. So nobody could go in there. And only one agent per party they allowed. And this time they use a projector and a bed sheet to project the statements of poll.
So you went from spreadsheet
From spreadsheet now to bed sheet. And the numbers were so small, you couldn't see what they were projecting. So it was a farce. Right? It was a complete and utter farce. Fight and so broke up inside the place. And lo and feel, Mr. Mingo proceeded to make his declaration again. We filed another set of court proceedings. While those court proceedings were being heard, by that time, CARICOM became involved. And a public statement emanated, I believe, from the chairman of CARICOM, that the president and the leader of the opposition agreed to a recount of all the ballots.
in all 10 regions.
In all 10 regions. A decision that GCOM adopted in the exercise of its autonomous powers. Because there was a subsequent argument that that's not a decision of GCOM, but a decision of the president and the leader of the opposition. But GCOM settled that with adopting they made a decision, unanimously too. After that agreement, APNU AFC, through a candidate of theirs, and represented by the same group of their own lawyers, who are all candidates, Roysdale, Ford, and all of them, rushed to the court to try to stop the recount now. Their leader just agreed at CARICOM, And here it is, in the most barefaced way. Not even trying to disguise. The same set of lawyers who are their candidates and who are appearing for them in all the shenanigans, and their own candidate being the person to bring the proceedings. They filed that. We had to go to the High Court, the full court. Then I believe that went all the way to the Court of Appeal. And then the way was paved. The way was cleared for the recount to take place. By that time, COVID came in. And all manner of public health reasons now were being put forward as to why the recount can't take place. I remember one day when the recount was to take place, they fumigated the whole place, the whole convention center. So you had all kinds of machinations that you had to pass
You
through.
had an alarm call of a bomb threat.
Yeah, you have several of that.
Yeah.
We had several bomb threats. Even while the court was going on, you had bomb threats. You had several bomb threats. That's a regular thing in Guyana. A political ploy employed by the by the PNC for years. They're always calling bomb threats and so on. And then we had the recount. And that lasted for another couple months. They prevented all the international observers from observing that recount. We wanted it to be streamed live. They refused. And we were there every day. Importantly, they agreed. They agreed to a CARICOM appointed team to be the sole observer of the recount process. In the words of Mr. Granger, he said CARICOM is the most legitimate interlocutor in this matter. So they appointed. Carter Center was excluded. All the other people were excluded. Only the CARICOM team. The CARICOM team went through the process, observed everything, observed the tabulations every night, because every night you're tabulating after you count. Of course, they were making all sorts of objections, and that's when they started manufacturing of objections. Then, 5 months after the elections, they then realized that 15,000 dead people voted. And that's the allegation. 15,000 people who are dead or who are living in America were impersonated in Guyana. I don't know how that happened. 15,000. Not 1,000, you know. 15,000. How 15,000 persons were able to beat all the polling stations in the country? Beat the presiding officers, the assistant presiding officer, the polling agents, including their own polling agents. Because these 15,000 people, the 15,000 people voted only for the PPP.
Okay.
That is it. Not one of them voted for AP and UAFC. So I don't know how their polling agents sat in the polling station and didn't see 15,000 people voted. And how none of the international observer teams saw any of them. And how the leadership of the APNU, that would have been across the country on the ground on election day, as I was, as Amna Ali and Basil Williams were, and all of them in different areas scrutinizing the process. None of them saw these 15,000 ghost voters.
Yeah.
But there's a story. And they start to manufacture things about documents not in box. Sheer foolishness. If a document is not in a box that's supposed to be in a box, does it invalidate the votes? I am going to vote at a polling station. Some recalcitrant, delinquent polling officer does not do his or her job and refused to put or did not put some statutory document in the box. Is it logical for me to lose my right to vote? My fundamental right to choose a government of my choice because of the delinquency of some presiding officer? I mean, these are the ridiculous, nonsensical arguments that they keep spewing day after day at the recount. And every one of them you are able to provide explanations for. I remember people on the Facebook were coming forward and said, look, I am Mary Jane. I am not dead. because they were holding up people's name and saying this person is dead or this person is overseas. Some of these people never traveled in their entire life. So these people came forward on their own volition. And all those things are in the public domain. The CARICOM team was absorbing all of this. And in the end, they prepared a report. And guess, you know what the recount proved? The recount proved that the statements of poll were correct. The recount of the ballots coincided or accorded with the statements of poll in the ballots. We made our statements of poll public from the beginning. From August the 3rd, I think, or the 4th. The PPP made its statements of poll public on the internet.
Right.
And when you look at the recount, and you look at our statements of poll, which are the statements of poll that GCOM has, they are identical. Identical.
Wow.
Right? So the whole thing was a fabrication. And the CARICOM report, the CARICOM team in their report said that. They said that the opposition went on a fishing expedition. They said that they spread their net too wide, but they caught nothing. And that their allegations and complaints and contentions were completely without merit, manufactured, concocted. They used some harsh language to describe. And finally propounded that the recount results should be declared as the final results. And that we thought that was the end of the matter. Lo and behold, another incarnation of attempt at fraud then starting to unfold, with Keith Lowenfield now taking the lead. Mingo was taking the lead all the time. He handed the baton over to Keith Lowenfield. And he's an agent of the commission. The commission gave him a direction to say tabulate these votes, because he has to do it by law and prepare the necessary instruments for the final results to be declared. He disregarded the recount results and he started to discount invalid votes. What he now becomes the judge, jury, and executioner. And he, by himself now, determining that all these votes here are invalid. And guess what are the invalid votes? When I think back about all these things, his opinion of what invalid votes were coincided and colluded absolutely with the allegations that were being made by APNU AFC. When you total their allegations and how many votes they were objecting to, that is the exact number that Mr. Lowenfield said. He determined that they are right. Right? And he decided to discount all of that. Again, obviously, all these votes came from the PPP. Nothing, the PNC not losing no votes, you know.
Yeah.
In all this shenanigans with dead people voting, not one of them affected APNU AFC votes. All these things, only PPP votes. So I think it was 160,000 or 260,000 votes he put aside and prepared a result, prepared the necessary instruments with those numbers. And obviously that is not what the election results say.
Yeah.
That is not what the recount produced.
We're now 4 years down from that.
Let me complete this.
Yes.
Again, we had to go about 2 times to the court, all the way to the Caribbean. 3 times we went. From there, we had 3 more court cases, traveling all the way to the Caribbean Court of Justice before he finally declared the correct results. Right? So I just want to complete
Yes, absolutely.
that long, winding
We have
narrative.
we have a few minutes, and I just want to ask you this pointed question: why is it important that the people of Guyana not forget what happened in 2020?
Democracy is the lifeblood of a nation. One of the Caribbean Court of Justice judgments in this matter, in these matters, one of these matters, begun with that opening sentence. Democracy is the lifeblood of a nation. Guyana suffered as a nation from a lack of democracy for 28 years. And we were reduced from one of Her Majesty's richest colony to a basket bankrupt economy. That is what democracy did to Guyana. We must never endure that again. Just look at, even the opposition will tell you that the economy is transforming and that Guyana is transforming. Even the greatest critic of this government will tell you that. Imagine if democracy was not allowed to prevail, where we would have been. And we don't have to look far. Just look across our border to Venezuela. Even before this election, over 10 million refugees have fled Venezuela and are begging a livelihood across the globe. Look at what is going on in Venezuela. Lack of free and fair elections. The US had already decided on a regime of sanctions. CARICOM had already decided that they will treat us in a particular way. The European Union had decided that they will treat us in a particular way. This is a global village that we live in. There is no one country that can survive international sanctions. None of the investors that you are seeing now would have been here. None of the loans that we have accessed, we would have been able to access. We would not have had peace and stability in the country because the Guyanese population had made it clear that they are not going to live under undemocratic rule. They resolved that, and they said that openly because they knew what they endured and what their parents endured. And parents and grandparents resolved that their future generations will not be subject to beriberi and white mouth and starvation, and they will not run from this land to seek refuge elsewhere. Guyanese people had resolved that. The third element is that those who authored and co-authored this malevolent design to steal the ballots of the electorate are very much around. They are very much around. And they are prepared to do it again. One only has to look at their own elections. Look at their own internal elections. They are stealing from themselves. They are defrauding themselves. You think they will not defraud you? The Guyanese voter. They are stealing their own ballots. What do you think they will do with your ballots? And Nazim, if I was making these things up, I would have even feel good if I was manufacturing these things. The cold hard truth is that I am living this. They stole each other votes just last month. Just last month, not even 2 months ago. The trial is going on. And who appearing for those charged with the fraud? The newly minted AFC leader. He is the lead counsel.
Right.
Now, I know I am a lawyer. I know that people are entitled to representation and lawyers are free to take cases. But if you want to aspire for political leadership, if you want to send a particular signal, if you want to take a posture on a particular matter, then you have to take into account the type of cases that you take. So you have a divide here of democracy on the one hand and those who attempted to trample upon democracy on the other hand. Which side did the leader of the AFC choose? He could have easily either stayed away or he could have come on the side. He didn't have to support the PPP, but he could have at least stayed on the side of democracy. And it is not the PPP who is saying that these attempts took place. This is what was found by the international community and everybody who witnessed it. This thing was not done in a secretive way.
Yeah.
It was openly done. 100 governments across the globe condemned this. 100 governments condemned this. An international independent commission of inquiry inquired into this and confirmed in its findings that these dastard acts to which I am referring took place and identified the key players. Those who are at GCOM and supported this design, there are many, many public instances where the skullduggery that was attempted received the support of 3 commissioners in GCOM at least. Those 3 commissioners are still there. Those 3 commissioners are still there. You have many in the public domain, and I could call their names, who publicly called upon President Granger to hold on to government despite the declaration of the results, despite the 100 government condemnation. They called upon him publicly, do not give up power. Hamilton Green is one of them. Lincoln Lewis is another one. They are still on the airwaves talking and pontificating and trying to shape public opinion in the press. And I can call more. So I say all of this, and we must never be shy, and we must never be timid in expressing these things, because we all played a role, and we all made sacrifices, and we all exposed ourselves to great perils in ensuring that this beautiful thing called democracy was protected and preserved.
For the people of Guyana.
For the people of Guyana. And the people of Guyana I'm speaking about, when I say we all, they played a magnificent role. And not one moment must they think that it cannot happen again. And that is why they must always be alive to the possibility of a reoccurrence and be vigilant and be ready to stand up with even greater might and greater force if it is to unfold once again.
This has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, Mr. Attorney General.
I've said a lot.
You said a lot, but it was a great discussion.
The Journey to Prosperity for All, celebrating the 4th anniversary of the PPPC's government.